So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Enablers of Impact, the role of incubators and accelerators in bridging investment and solutions, hosted in collaboration with Evpn Innovation Network and Maze Decoding Impact. So it's a pleasure for me to see so many people connected to this session today. My name is Alessa Gianoncelli, and I'm the Head of Knowledge Center at Evpn, where I'm responsible for all activities linked to research and content development. For those who don't know it, Evpn is a European network of more than 300 members investing for impact and or interested in venture philanthropy and impact investing. Today, I will be moderating this webinar together with my colleague Gianluca Gaggiotti, Evpn Research Associate, and responsible for our upcoming data collection, and Dinesh Charro, who is Public Sector Analyst at Maze Decoding Impact, a Lisbon-based social investment intermediary that implements financial and non-financial mechanisms to unlock capital towards social change in Portugal. And Dinesh also co-authored the report Enablers of Impact with us. Then I'm happy to have here with us today Chiara Davalli, Senior Project Leader at Evpn and responsible for delivering EU and non-EU projects. She is also the manager of the Social Impact Special Interest Group. Evpn is a network of around 140 quality certified EU BICs, business and innovation centers, and 40 other organizations that support the development and growth of innovative entrepreneurs, startups, and SMEs. And Evpn and Evpn just signed a partnership, so I'm very happy today to lead this webinar together also with Chiara. Then we have two impact funds presenting today, so welcome to Omar Benjelloun Tuimi, who is investment officer at Incos Venture Capital, which is an impact investing firm investing in socially inclusive and environmental sustainable startups with compelling financial returns. Omar coordinates the work on impact measurement at group level. He manages a growing portfolio of investments in sustainable food, accessibility tech, and job inclusion, and contributes to deal origination and due diligence process. Last but not least, I'm happy to introduce Antonio Miguel, who is co-founder and managing director of Maze Decoding Impact and the managing director of Master Seed Maze, a Portuguese impact fund with a pan-European focus. Antonio also led the structuring of the first social impact bond pilot in Portugal, provided technical advisory to the creation of Portugal's Innovation Social, the 150 million wholesaler social investment institution in Portugal, and he leads the technical work of the Portuguese Social Investment Task Force. Antonio, together with Gianluca, Dinesh, and me, also co-authored our report Enablers of Impact. So welcome to our speakers today. But before to dive into the content of today's webinar, I would like to address few housekeeping rules. So throughout this session, you will be able to open or hide the control panel, which is the console that appears on the right-hand side of your screen. At the end of the webinar, we will have 30 minutes for a Q&A session during which our panelists will answer your inquiries. So please, if you do have a question, don't hesitate to write it down in the relative section of the control panel at any moment during the webinar. And please don't forget to clearly mention to whom you would like to address your question. Then, since the number of participants in this webinar is very high, we're keeping everyone muted. Please note that this session has been recorded, and you should be able to watch the recording and to consult this presentation as of next week on our Evpn website. And last but not least, if you encounter any technical issue during the webinar, you can send an email to my colleague Arnaud Picon, and you can see his email address here on the slide. So, looking at the agenda for today, first, Gianluca and I are going to give you a brief introduction about the Enablers of Impact report that Evpn has put together with Maze. We will present key insights and recommendations included in the report, and then Chiara will elaborate in details the role of Evpn alongside the 5 recommendations that we have included in the report. After that, Ines will moderate a poll session where you will be asked to answer some questions in an interactive way. Then we will move to a very interesting part of the webinar where two experienced practitioners and experts, Omar and Antonio, will present their impact funds, the characteristics they look at when selecting new investees, and also the way in which they collaborate with incubators and accelerators. And in the end, as I mentioned earlier, we will have these 30 minutes for a Q&A session. So again, don't forget to write your questions in the control panel so that we will be able to read them and to ask them to our panelists. Now, I will leave the floor to my colleague Gianluca, who can start giving you an introduction to the Evpn maze report. So Gianluca, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alessia, for this, for welcoming the audience, and good afternoon to everyone. In the next few minutes, I will introduce you to the report Enablers of Impact. This report is aimed at complementing another Evpn report, 15 years of impact, where we included an in-depth analysis of all the capital providers active within the impact ecosystem. With this separated report, we wanted to focus on those key players that work as enablers between the supply side of the ecosystem, which is represented by capital providers, and the demand side, which includes all the social purpose organizations. With the term social purpose organization, we want to cover from non-profit entities such as NGOs to social enterprises. We developed this report together with Maze Decoding Impact, which is a very knowledgeable actor in the ecosystem that also has a specific tech expertise and experience in this topic, as they have been running an impact-oriented acceleration program since 2018, which is called MazeX. So as you can see from the slide, the report has two main objectives. The first one is to explain the added value that incubators and accelerators bring to the social purpose organization supported. And the second one is to describe the role of incubators and accelerators in the European impact ecosystem. As you can see briefly from the timeline that is included in the slide, this report is a result of more than 10-month research process that encompassed a policy webinar and a subsequent policy brief on the topic of incubators and accelerators, a desk-based research that included more than 60 impact-oriented incubators and accelerators, as well as over 100 of business incubators and accelerators that served as a benchmark for our analysis. On top of that, we also ran a quantitative survey that registered 22 respondents, which is almost a third of the total population identified, and qualitative interviews with 14 incubators and accelerators and leading networks in the field. So before we continue, I would like to clarify that we use the term incubators and accelerators as an umbrella term to represent a wide range of tools and programs, such as you can see from the figures, from the figure below, pre-accelerators, accelerators, incubators, investment readiness programs, and leadership programs. As you can see from the figure, we also engaged in an exercise of mapping each category, looking at two variables: the type of support provided and the stage of development of the SPO. So now I would like to give you a general overview of the incubators and accelerators that has been included in the report, looking at the stats produced thanks to the quantitative surveys. So first of all, here in the first figure, you can observe that incubators and accelerators can be funded through various sources, both public and private, and that corporate and philanthropic funding are the primary source of funding for our respondents. These results reflect, on the one hand, the interest for corporations to establish links with the social purpose organization participating in the programs to identify areas of work that could be relevant for their core businesses. And on the other side, the high percentage of philanthropic funding reflects the impact orientations of the programs included in the study. Looking at the different types of organizations supported, we can notice that most incubators and accelerators work with for-profit entities with a pure social mission, as well as non-profit organizations that generate some revenue, and profit maximizing organization with social impact. On top of the type of organizations, we also looked at the stage of development of the organization targeted by incubators and accelerators, and the majority of the respondents target startups and organizations at the validation stage. Finally, we can observe that the main eligibility criteria valued by the incubators and accelerators included in the study. All the respondents consider the impact potential of the social purpose organization to be a key eligibility criteria. And more than 3/4 also assess the degree of relevance of the social or environmental challenge tackled by the organization supported as a key eligibility criteria. So we really believe that these really distinguish impact-oriented incubators and accelerators from homologous initiatives that are not impact-related. We also looked and investigated the main challenges faced by incubators and accelerators. And as you can see from the graph, more than half of the respondents reported the difficulty in developing a sustainable funding model and in finding the resources needed for the program. This finding was also confirmed by the managers interviewed during the qualitative interviews, who shared that securing long-term support for their programs was a very hard task. Another important challenge that also emerged during the interviews and in the figure as well relates to the data collection of the organization after their participation to the program. So collecting data is crucial to improve and better tailor different elements of the incubators and accelerators programs, such as the type of support provided and the profile of partners to work with. We will soon come back to these challenges, but now I will leave the floor to my colleague Alessia again, who will illustrate the key insights and recommendations included in the report.
Thank you, Gianluca, for this first overview. So now what I would like to do is to try to summarize a bit all the key insights and the recommendations that we have included in the report, trying to coupling them also, knowing that Chiara then afterwards during her presentation will go through all the 5 recommendations included, and she will explain us how Evpn is working towards these recommendations. So let me start with the first key insight that we have identified, that is a need for more collaboration. So as you might imagine, as you might have read in other researches, there are main barriers to the development for social purpose organizations, social enterprises. Specifically, there is a lack of specialist business development services, there is a lack of access to markets, and there is also a lack of access to capital. So we think, and we have included in the report, that there is a need for more collaboration in order to tackle these barriers and in order to help SPOs, social purpose organizations and social enterprises, expand to new markets, to increase the value proposition of incubators and accelerators programs by developing new tools and provide better support to entrepreneurs, then also to improve access to new investors and corporate partners for social enterprises. And last but not least, we believe that more collaboration is also needed in order to match the needs of social enterprises, social purpose organizations, and the requirements of investors. So in the report, this is the recommendation that we have included. So incubators and accelerators should engage with all investors, such as traditional philanthropic institutions, investors for impact, investors with impact, but also traditional investors. Then, as second recommendation, we think that incubators and accelerators should foster collaboration with other partners, such as universities and governments. Then we believe that incubators and accelerators should share more information and resources with peers, so we also believe in a collaboration among themselves. And then we believe that they have to engage with social purpose organizations, not just during the support program takes place, but also before and after, to strengthen this collaboration and the added value they can bring. And finally, we believe that incubators and accelerators should co-create the support they offer to SPOs together with their partners. So, continuing with the second key insight and recommendation that we have found in the report that we have included, there is the need for an increased support in impact measurement and management. So, as you might imagine, social purpose organizations need to strengthen their impact measured and management practices. So, as you can see here, this is a slide included in the report. There are 3 areas in which incubators and accelerators offer support to social purpose organizations. And the first one is financial sustainability, the second one is social impact, and then we have organizational resilience. Of course, it is very good to see that financial sustainability is the first support, is the first area in which incubators and accelerators offer support, meaning they offer support in the strategic support with the revenue strategy, financial management, but also fundraising. But we believe that there is still something that can be done in terms of supporting social enterprises in their journey towards impact measurement and management. So, as a recommendation in the report, we say that throughout their programs, incubators and accelerators should strengthen their support to social entrepreneurs in IMM to help them define their impact goals, co-design a roadmap to achieve these goals, combine their IMM system, impact measurement and management system, with their business model, and also they have to support them in communicating their impact in a clear and transparent manner. So, looking at the last recommendation and insight that I would like to share with you today, we have identified a need for properly assessing the focus for incubators and accelerators. So, in the report, we have found that there are 2 opposite approaches when it comes to choose a focus for incubators and accelerators, and that there is a trade-off looking at these 2 different approaches. So the first one is a specialization approach. That means that incubators and accelerators only target 1 or 2 specific thematic areas, and this translates in a better tailored support to social purpose organizations that are targeting specific areas. But it also means that there is more relevance for specific industries and funders. On the other side, there is also a generalistic approach, which means that incubators and accelerators might be agnostic regarding the thematic areas in which they operate and they give support. And this translates, of course, in a wider pool of SPOs that are eligible for their programs, and also it brings to a more scalability of the program itself and more successful cases. So the recommendation that we give in the report is just to consider, well assess this focus, considering 2 elements. The first one is the end game of the program, and the second one is to understand how this might affect the type of support provided and the funding model. Here, another graph from the report. So, as you can see, the majority of incubators and accelerators that were part of our study are taking a generalistic approach, and of course this comes with all the other the added value that I just mentioned. But of course we also see that there are incubators and accelerators that prefer to have a more tailored support, and specifically in areas such as health, education, or social services, for example. So I'll stop here, and I'm happy to give the floor now to Chiara, that can go through all the recommendations in depth and can link them to the work of Evpn. So Chiara, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessia. First of all, I would thank EVPA and Maze for giving us, Evpn, the opportunity to share some considerations about the main recommendations raised in the Enablers of Impact report. Just a small note to say that in the slides you will see some data, some graphs, and these are informed by the annual EU-BIC impact and activity report, and the data refer to 2018. So next slide, and we can start. We start from telling a little bit about Evpn, the European BIC network that counts today 170 members that support the development and growth of innovative entrepreneurs, startups, and SMEs in Europe and beyond. 120 of our members are certified business innovation centers, the EU BICs, that provide high quality support to innovative entrepreneurs in their catchment areas through a customized delivery of professional support and incubation services. Next. So next slide. So as you can see also in this table, the EU BICs present different shapes and different business models, but they all share the ultimate goal of contributing to the local and regional economic development and growth through the promotion and support of innovative entrepreneurship. In 2018, these, let's say, was translated in 23,000 companies supported by the BICs and more than 22,000 jobs created. Next. So coming to the recommendations raised and presented in the report, I would start from the market mismatch. There's something that at Evpn we observe regularly, even from a, let's say, more traditional mainstream business support perspective. And if you consider that 1/4 of the companies supported by the EU BICs in 2018 received help to access funding streams from pre-seed to startup to scale up, well, I think this is definitely something we need to pay attention. And so at Evpn, we are working more and more in the social impact area. And that's why, let's say, we have just started, signed an MOU with EVPA to really pay close attention to this market mismatch, and therefore work together with investors for impact and with impact to let incubators prepare and work with entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, to access a diverse range of funds. And on the other side, to work together with EVPA to assess the needs and the requests from the entrepreneur's side. So to see what are the tools, the instruments that best fit the specific needs and their development stages. Next slide. The need for better collaboration. I usually say that Evpn is a network of networks, because our EU BICs rely on a network of strategic alliances to implement their objectives and therefore support the entrepreneurial ecosystem in their regions. In this, so as you can see here, the EU BICs, the Evpn members are placed in a framework of a complex network of actors, all working towards a shared common goal. in the framework of the social innovation arena, I would give you an example of a recent example, the Social Challenges Innovation Platform project that was funded by the European Commission DG Growth a few years ago, where EBN members were facilitating and mentoring regional ecosystems, where societal needs were expressed by public, private, or third sector organizations, and then were addressed, these needs, by entrepreneurs with impact-driven solutions. The 10 EBN members involved in this action managed to mobilize 28 challenges that received 40 granted solutions in approximately 1 year and a half. This is just an example. So we can move to the next slide. In terms of impact measurement and management practices, as I was telling you, EBN is quite new in the social impact discourse, but working with partners, actors like Evpn and others in this arena, we understood more and more the importance and the relevance of shifting or complementing the work of the incubators towards a major attention to social impact. So in 2015, we created the so-called Social Impact Special Interest Group that brings together EBN members interested in these topics to share good practices, learning experiences, and opportunities for them and for their companies. Moreover, as you can see at the bottom of this slide, we are participating in several EC-funded collaborative projects that are providing EBN and their members with networking and learning opportunities in this area, mainly responsible innovation, inclusive entrepreneurship, and social innovation and entrepreneurship. Next slide. Specializations versus generalization. Most of the EU BICs have a generalist approach, mainly because, again, of their main mission, that it's about supporting the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem in the region. Of course, for example, the regional smart specialization strategies can influence this dimension, but again, we usually observe a more generalistic approach. What is interesting is that even in generalist incubators, EU BICs, you can then find some specific programs that are designed specifically for specific sectors or target groups. I show here just a couple of examples. One more specialist from Veritech, a member in Lebanon, the Agritech program, which is focusing on the agro-food and clean tech sector, and a more generalistic one, the Coventry University Social Enterprise, that is indeed more generalist. Next. Okay, last but not least, the selection bias, which is indeed a very key aspect. Well, if we look at the profile of the EU BICs, they, so our members do cover the whole incubation chain through their services. So you can find services to, let's say, from entrepreneurship promotion to scaling to indeed startup to scaling. These resulted last year, so in 2018, actually in 40,000 inquiries coming indeed from entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs at the different stages of the incubation journey. So at EBN, now we are pushing our members and we are promoting a more inclusive and diverse approach. So pushing the members to become truly inclusive and therefore open more and more their services their organizations, their premises, to a wide range of entrepreneurs, would-be entrepreneurs, SPOs, as we believe that incubators, even mainstream incubators, are well equipped to work with these entrepreneurs, with these groups. But of course, they need to adapt, improve their services, their tools, and even their language to work closer and better with these profiles. And that's why we are here today. That's why we engaged in this partnership with Evpn to learn and exchange from those that know more than us on this, and so to really align our goals, our mission to improve the incubation services and ecosystem. Next slide. So if you want to know more about Evpn, because my time is over, I guess, so you have here a couple of reports. The links are embedded in the slides. Just wanted to mention that the new impact and activity report will be released in June, at the end of June, and it will present data from 2019. Last slide, so next. So impact-driven innovation is a driver for economic growth in a social, inclusive, ethical, and sustainable way. Since a few years now, this message and this approach is getting stronger and stronger within the network among our members. And actually, we believe that EUBICS can help European entrepreneurs, startups, SMEs as Alessia was mentioning before, in really thinking about the impact they can generate with their projects, with their solutions, with their businesses. And therefore, we are keen and willing to help these companies in their decision-making, taking into account a long-term vision, an inclusive attitude, and a societally oriented approach. So I'm done. If you want to continue the conversation, of course, I'm here till the very end of the webinar. Please feel free to drop an email. And I now give the floor to Ines.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alessia, Chiara, and Gianluca for this brief introduction. So we wanted to start off this interactive part of the webinar by having a better sense of who our audience today is. So the first question is for all of you. You should be seeing a poll question appearing in front of you right now, for which you should select only one answer. So this first question is, what type of organization do you represent? A, incubators, accelerators. B, capital providers, meaning impact funds, foundations, banks, etc. C, academic institutions, think tanks, research centers, or D, others. So I see that as of right now, we have overwhelmingly a big percentage of incubators and accelerators, also some capital providers and some academic institution, and a lot of people chose the option others. So quite a heterogeneous group. So we wanted to tailor the next few questions for each of these groups in order to dig a bit deeper. And since the report is focused on enablers of impact, when Gianluca mentioned this is an umbrella term for incubators and accelerators, this means that pre-accelerators, investment readiness programs, and leadership programs are also included under this term. So we wanted to target the second question just for this audience, as I see that 34% of the 120 which are part of our audience today are incubators and accelerators. So around 30 incubators and accelerators in the audience. So our second question, just for incubators and accelerators, relates to something we discussed previously, which is the challenges that were highlighted in the report. We wanted to understand, of the challenges highlighted in the report that Gianluca previously mentioned, which ones are the most pressing for your organization? A, funding the program. B, attracting and maintaining talent. C, raising awareness, communicating the program. D, balancing business versus social impact. or E, data collection on the organization after graduation? So I'm seeing the answers live right now. Very interesting. Number one, as of right now, seems to be funding the program. And number two is a close tie between balancing business versus social impact and data collection to target, to tailor the program for the SPOs. This is very interesting. In the report, we also found that the number one difficulty, both in the survey and the qualitative interviews conducted, was indeed funding the program. One of the reasons why this is such a challenge for impact incubators and accelerators is the fact that these are high risk and early stage SPOs that they work with. And it's also worth noticing that attracting and maintaining talent, for instance, is not a very big challenge. Our hypothesis in the report is that this finding is corroborated by microdata that indicates that 74% of millennials want a job that has a purpose, which is in fact the case when working for an impact incubator and accelerator. Very interesting. So one more question just for incubators and accelerators. Once again, we wanted to know, what is your source of capital? We also saw some information on this. A, corporate funding, B, philanthropic funding, C, impact investment funding, D, venture capital, E, public funding, either EU, national, regional, or local. So I'm seeing the results live, and corporate funding is indeed the number one option for most of you. Curiously, the number two is not philanthropic funding, but rather public funding. So maybe we're not dealing with just impact incubators in the audience, some business incubators and accelerators as well. And I have a sense that we're going to have a tie in the end between corporate funding, philanthropic funding, and public funding. So for the report, what we saw was that corporate funding and philanthropic funding are the option for more than 50% of the respondents. Corporate funding has been a rising trend since it offers the chance for corporates to leverage on the SPOs to test an innovative hypothesis for these smaller and more agile organizations. And unlike what we saw in the report, I think that in the audience, there's quite a lot of public funding. In the report, what we saw is that for public funding, the number one option was public national funding rather than EU funding. So it's quite interesting to see what you have to say about this. I also see that 11% of you have a tie with impact investors, which is very interesting for the discussion we're going to have ahead. So the last question I have just for incubators and accelerators, and then we're going to broaden the scope a bit, is concerning what elements are the most relevant when choosing the entrepreneurs to work with. So once again, you have 5 options and you should select one: the stage of development of the organization, the business potential, the quality of the team, the relevance of the social or environmental problem, or the impact potential. This one is very closely tied. So I see a lot of people choosing impact potential, relevance of social problem. Impact potential is gaining a lot of tracking. The answers, what we saw in the report, and as Gianluca presented, all of our interviewees talked about the importance of seeing the potential impact of the solutions of the entrepreneurs they work with. They also focused a lot on the relevance of the social problem being addressed, and the stage of the organization is not as relevant. And this is quite coherent with the answers we're seeing. So I think you're going to see the results now. The number one is indeed impact potential. People also focus a lot on the business potential and quality of the team, and less so on the stage of development of the organization. This is quite coherent with the results that you can see on the report. Finally, we would like to ask a question just for capital providers in the audience. We noticed that we have quite a lot, and we wanted to know whether you are currently partnering with an incubator or accelerator to find pipeline for investors. So option A is yes, B, not yet, but we are interested in it, C, no, but we collaborate for other purposes, or D, no, and we are not interested in doing so. So results for now are not very surprising. So the majority of you are either collaborating with incubators and accelerators already, or are interested in doing so. or collaborate for other purposes. So this is the overwhelming majority of the answers. We hope that the next part of the webinar further sparks your interest in developing such a collaboration. And to that end, we'll have the 2 presentations of VC funds that are currently partnering with impact incubators and accelerators. So on this note, I would like to introduce Antonio Miguel. As Alessia mentioned, Antonio will now present the Mustard Seed Maize Fund and the collaboration between the VC fund and the accelerator MaizeX. Antonio is the founder and CEO of Maize, an impact investment company based in Lisbon. And last year, his team closed the first round of the first impact venture capital fund in Portugal. So I will now give the word to Antonio.
Thank you very much, Inês, and thank you very much, Evpn and Evpn for the invitation to be here. I hope everyone can hear me well, and I'll be very happy and available to answer any questions that you have. It's a big privilege to be here and to be presenting on behalf of an impact fund, because the road to creating this impact fund was a lengthy and a very big one that took a considerable amount of time. Mustard Seed Maize, or MSM as I'll refer to from now onwards, is an impact fund that takes a venture capital approach, which means that we invest in early stage ventures, startups, enterprises, all synonyms for the same thing, that are mostly using technology to address and solve social and environmental challenges. But MSM is a joint venture between Maize and Mustard Seed. Maize, Portuguese impact investment firm, Mustard Seed, UK-based impact investment firm. But it's very important to share that we started by 6-7 years ago by looking at impact investment as a whole and as an ecosystem. We like thinking of impact investment as a toolbox that has many different instruments. We've launched impact bonds, and we actually started with an accelerator, and the accelerator is MaizeX. And it was because of what we were seeing with the accelerator that we had the idea of, let's raise the fund so that we can have the freedom and the right incentives to be able to back the visionary entrepreneurs that we work with. And I can explain a lot of things in detail about the relationship between both. I'll just briefly introduce how MSM works as a fund, what is our investment thesis, what we look for when we assess ventures, and how do we interact with accelerators, and namely with MaizeX. Before I start, just the first and foremost and more important thing is that we at MSM, we feel incredibly privileged to be able to have raised this fund, to have investors that believe in us and that have given us the mandate to support entrepreneurs all over Europe. And the reason why I'm saying this is because we don't take that privilege lightly. We take it very seriously, as I know that a lot of incubators, accelerators, and investors in the audience also do. So what I will explain now, it's basically the result of a couple of months and years of learning, but there's a lot of things to improve and a lot of things to get better at. So in terms of our fund, when we move into the next slide, we are an impact venture capital fund. So it's the first fund of its kind in Portugal. So it's the equivalent to a new ZEF fund, European Union Social Entrepreneurship Fund. We invest from the earliest stage you can imagine, pre-seed, an idea, a ticket of 25 or 50,000 euros into, if we move from pre-seed to seed, seed extension, Series A or B, depending on the round size, we can go with the company throughout all these stages. And this is really important for our investment thesis because we want to be alongside the entrepreneurs that we believe in and that we're backing from the beginning. So that means that we can go from a small ticket of 50,000 euros into a ticket as big as 3 million euros into a single company. And of course, we can start with 50 and then do 500,000 and then do 1 million and then do 3 million. And overall, if I'm not mistaken, we've got an exposure of 4.5 million into a single company. The fund size at the moment is 35 million. We just launched last October. We've made 5 official investments to date, and we've got a few more to announce. And we invest everywhere in Europe, excluding the UK. So we've invested in Portugal, Spain, Denmark, Sweden, Germany, across Europe. Because we are a venture capital fund, that means that it comes with some limitations. So we've got a 10-year period for our fund, and we hope to create a portfolio of 35 companies. The next slide, what it describes is our investment thesis and belief. So as Evpn puts it very well, you have investors with impact, investors for impact. We stand for what's called the Lockstep Model, which is a niche within the impact ecosystem. So it's not a response to all different strategies. It's a very specific and niche strategy, which is we believe that, or we invest, in businesses where profit and revenues are positively and intrinsically correlated with the impact that is created. And actually, it's the creation of impact that drives the revenues. A good example of that is food waste. If the monetization of the business is one through which the reduction in food waste represents more revenues for the solution that we're backing, we call that a lockstep model. And we believe that lockstep models are a great economic opportunity because most problems linked to the SDGs hide big market opportunities. For instance, food waste alone is worth 1 trillion. Talent wants to work for impact businesses. Impact businesses and brands have better loyalty and consumer engagement. And as a result, we strongly believe that that will reduce the cost of capital for impact businesses. We take the framework as a fund of the UN SDGs. And even though we're quite SDG agnostic, we have a spike for some of them, like health and well-being, education, sustainable cities, climate action, and so on and so forth. What I will present next is what we look at when we are lucky to receive investment proposals and investment opportunities from entrepreneurs. So the first thing we look at is whether the business is lockstep. So how is it creating impact? Is the impact driving the revenues, or is it the side-by-side model where one sacrifices the other, or because I do something, I can donate a bit for impact? So it has to be lockstep in nature, and we take that very, very seriously, and we predefine what can be those metrics that mean that revenue and impact are correlated. The other thing is the team. The team is, I know it's a cliche, but we are so early stage investors that what we're backing from the start is visionary and good teams that can pivot if things don't go so well. Then we look at the market. Is the market a growing market? Is the market opportunity sizable enough that if the company addresses a small part of it, it can move the dial? And then we look at the business model. Is it scalable? Does it have the fundamentals that help it scale? Based on this venture screening, and we have a very strong relationship with an accelerator, which is MazeX. So in the next slide, sorry, I forgot the magic words. In the next slides, what you have is how we interact with MazeX, an accelerator implemented by Maze, which is a 3-month impact accelerator that works with ventures from all over Europe. You can see in the slide the numbers, but I'll just convey some important messages. The first one is that the accelerator takes no equity. So it gives 7,500 euros to each company that participates, but it's equity free. We do it for a number of reasons that I'll be very happy to explain. The other thing is that the ventures that participate in the accelerator will not necessarily receive money from the fund, only if they want and if the fund's team decides to invest in them. So there's no mandatory investment because there's a fund and an accelerator. And the reason why I say this is because the accelerator is very focused on helping companies grow commercially, find in big corporates commercial opportunities to test their products, to scale their products, instead of just focusing on fundraising, which might not be the ideal route for some of them. So as a fund, we benefit a lot from the MazeX accelerator, because of course we see a lot of interesting opportunities that we can assess from the start. Those opportunities that we think are relevant can receive 3 months support, which might be or not a proxy for them to strengthen their business model and their impact model. And the last thing I want to say is that because there are so many corporate partners into the accelerator, it's also very good for us as a fund, because big corporates are a very important lever for the success of early stage startups. So we create those bondings and those networks from the start. And despite having, of course, a special relationship with MazeX, the fund also keeps a close relationship with many other incubators and accelerators across Europe, because it's an amazing source of talent and good opportunities and ventures. And I think I will stop here, but I'll be fully available for any questions that exist. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Antonio. And also thank you to all of you, because you are starting writing your questions. So we are taking care of this, and then we will ask questions to our speakers in the Q&A session. So now I'm happy to give the floor to Omar, who can explain us how it works at Inc Venture Capital. So Omar, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks EVPA, Evpn, and Maze for the report. It's very insightful. I've really enjoyed reading it. Yeah, so Inco, I'm gonna tell you a bit more about who we are and how we work with our incubator and accelerators. So yeah, maybe let's start with the next slide. Great. So first of all, the story of the group is we have not been an investment fund first. Like we've been created by a social enterprise, which is called Groupe SOS, which is one of the biggest social enterprises in Europe, with approximately 1 billion in revenues and 18,000 employees. And the idea was for Groupe SOS to create an investment fund, an investment arm, to be able to accelerate some of the startups that were created inside of the group. The thing is, with time, we realized that we could be useful outside of Groupe SOS and be able to finance and help entrepreneurs which are not part of the group. So we've left Groupe SOS a few years ago. So now Inco Group is completely independent, and we have three jobs, three activities, main activities. The first one is training. So maybe let's start with the biggest one, which is investment. We've created an investment fund in 2011. We have approximately 200 million euros under management, with approximately 86 investees right now. We're going to talk about that. So this is the first activity. The second activity, and we're going to talk about it too, is the incubation and acceleration programs, which are generally between 6 months and a year support programs. And finally, we have created a training program which makes us also a social enterprise, because we're not only supporting others create impact, especially in education. We also actually have programs of our own with our own beneficiaries, especially young people who have no qualification, and that we try to help with the job search. And then with all of this, we have a fourth activity which is quite new, which is consulting. And the reason for these four activities that we believe that actually we need system change. We need to be working with everyone, not only with startups, but also with corporates. That's why we do consulting with governments, and we create incubators and accelerators with governments in certain areas, very specific areas, to be able to tackle problems. And in this way, with these four activities, we're able to try and stimulate system change and not only private company change or startup change. So the investing activity is mainly in France. I'd say 90% of it is in France, and the rest is quite international. So we have incubators and accelerators in more than 10 countries worldwide, not only in Europe. And for training, we're in slightly less countries and work with approximately 2,000 people every year. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit more about our investment thesis. So we invest what we call between seed and Series A or Series B. This means that we invest starting 300,000 euros. That's our current investment thesis. We have before invested smaller amounts. We have done pre-seed before with the companies that generated no revenues, for example. But currently, yeah, we're focusing on this range. And these could be with any types of companies, actually. It could be for-profits, non-profits, cooperatives, foundations. And this makes us not only venture capitalists, but also what we call a solidarity funder. For example, if we work with an NGO, we cannot expect high returns, and therefore the economic model, the business model of a venture capital firm does not work. We actually have what we call quasi-equity instruments, which are not capital instruments or capital investments, but some types of very junior debt that actually is much more flexible and easier to access than bank loans, that we try to provide to structures that cannot raise capital. This is the case, for example, for foundations or for nonprofits. So if we divide our portfolio in two, I'd say a bit more than a half of our portfolio is business oriented with a VC-like thesis, and the other half is more of a impact first and a nonprofit type of investments. Yeah, and we have the privilege to work with a series of LPs which always prioritize the impact, and this is very helpful. So you can see them on the screen. It's mostly institutional investors, so insurances, pension funds, well, the equivalent of pension funds in France, and then a few banks, especially cooperative banks. If we go to the next slide, I think we'll see our investment targets. We've covered this a bit. So the first thing we look at, and this is common to a lot of other investors, and Antonio mentioned it, that the first thing which is quite obvious is, of course, the team. The most important thing for us is that the team be intrinsically impact driven, and this differentiates us from what Evpn calls investors with impact. We really look for entrepreneurs who prioritize impact above everything else. And of course, we're looking for exceptional founders. This is something that everyone will tell you, but it's quite important to underline again. Second thing, the stage. So when we talk about seed, Series A, Series B, it can vary. The revenue stage can vary from a sector to another, but in general, if we want to make things simpler, we generally invest in startups that make more than 100,000 K in revenue. So this means that there's at least a prototype which is marketed, and generally a year or two of testing in the market in real conditions. Next is, of course, the business model, where I really like the concept that Antonio framed, which is the Lockstep model. We're not exclusively focused on that because we're also funding foundations and actually companies or structures that don't have a very strong business model, and we need them for certain problems. As Antonio said, it depends on the sectors. But for our startups, it's very important that the two be compatible, that the growth and the stronger impact can go hand in hand. And last but not least, the impact domains are very large. We also look at the 17. We actually look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals equally. Historically we've been focused a lot on social change and social objectives, but we've widened our targets in the last 2 or 3 years. And you can see our portfolio on the next slide, which is here. So as you can see, there's a lot of logos. So you can see here 82 logos. It went up to 86 in the last months. Most of these companies are French, as I said before, so you might not recognize them. But as you can see, there are 4 main sectors, or I would say impact domains, more because there are more sectors than that. But we invest in energy and ecology. An example would be Enercop, which is one of the biggest distributors of cooperative green energy, which means energy which is produced from small producers and not from the nuclear energy, which is the main source here in France. Another sector, for example, is circular economy, where we have today one of the companies who collect the food waste in all Paris, which is called Moulineau, for example, which has gone a lot in the last few years. We have health, education, things that we've talked about before. But as you can see, very varied types of businesses. And we can start talking about our relationship with our accelerators, since it's the main topic of the day. So as you can see, we have actually 2 separate structures, juridical structures. I mean, they're separated in legally, because of course, to be a certified investment management company in France, we cannot have other activities. So that's why we have separated the 2, and we have 2 separate teams and processes. So we've just talked about Incubventures, which is our investment arm. Now, Incubators is actually a non-profit. It's independently controlled by not the managers, not the founders of Inco, but by a board of experts in the domains we invest in. And actually, they are active all around the world, whereas Incubventures is mostly active in France. So this makes the working together very interesting, because we can learn a lot from each team, each separate team. And basically, if we want to summarize our relationship, we actually provide support in investment readiness. What we call investment readiness is actually, for example, training about fundraising, training on strategic business model setting, things that we actually see in our due diligences that we can share with the companies that are supported by our incubators. And in the other way around, the incubators actually bring, of course, deal flow when they're based in France, because for the programs which are based outside, we actually provide support for some of them, but we cannot invest in their supported companies. So let's dig a little bit more on the French incubators, which is the next slide. So here you have 4 examples of our programs. So we don't have a unique incubator because each incubator has a business model that is reliant on partners, either private partners, generally corporates who want to innovate in domains that create impact, or public partners which want to create activities in their region or their cities. We're not only working in Paris, we're actually very active in many cities in France, although France is a very centralized country compared to other countries in Europe, like Spain or Germany, for example. Maybe to make it simple, there are 4 main things we do with our incubators and accelerators that are based in France. The first one is, of course, selection. We participate in every step of the selection, and we bring a very financial view to what we can see in the entrepreneurs. And we try to have in mind the entrepreneurs that we can invest in when we select the projects that are incubated or accelerated in our incubators. The second thing is that we have, as most of incubators, we have collective sessions, which are get around moments where all the entrepreneurs in one batch will meet and learn from each other. Actually, we'll have a specific training on fundraising and investment readiness, which is facilitated by the investment team. This helps us create bonds, create very personal relationships with the projects that are incubated or accelerated. This is the second pillar. The third pillar would be the individual coaching, because in most of these programs, we try to have a bespoke support, the ability for entrepreneurs which are supported to actually come to us with questions and ask the investment team about their pitch deck, about their investment strategy, about raising debt versus raising capital, things like that. We try to maintain regular relationships with the people who are supported in our accelerators and incubators. And of course, the last thing, which is I'd say in the background, but it's one of the most interesting pillars of the relationship with our incubators, is the market intelligence. So the thing is, to make it very concrete, actually we share an IT system where we have a database of the SPOs, of social purpose organizations in all the countries we operate in, and we both work on it. Our investment team and our incubation teams actually maintain it with insights, with the findings in the different markets we invest in. And this is very interesting because when we are due diligencing an entrepreneur for an investment, we can always go into our database and type for all the companies we've seen, be it in the incubation or investment, to see what's the market status in a sector, for example. This is extremely helpful, and I cannot emphasize enough the role that exchanging knowledge has played in our relationship with our incubators. So yeah, I think that's it. Let's go to the next slide to thank you for your attention, and of course I'm open to all your questions in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for both of your presentations. Actually, we had prepared some questions for both speakers, but since the audience has been so interactive, we wanted to go straight into it. And the first question we have is directed to Chiara. The question is, are there shared metrics to assess the social impact of incubation acceleration services, since impact reporting and investment standards and social return on investment may be too complex metrics for incubators and accelerator activities?
Okay, thank you for the question. So as I was telling you, EBN is quite new in this impact-driven, let's say, framework. But we have been involved in the last 3 years in a project called FIBIA, Foster Inclusive Business Incubation Acceleration, where part of the work was exactly about this. So collecting data to understand the role and the impact incubators and accelerators could play in working and addressing underrepresented entrepreneurs. So what we did is that we gathered some data on the level of accessibility of the services provided by the EBN members and the diversity among the entrepreneurs supported. So our EUBICs have to fill in a quality questionnaire every year. So that is assessing everything about from their organizational dimension to the network they have in place to support the ecosystem, to the services they provide, to some KPIs. So to understand the deal flow within incubator, I mean the number of inquiries and businesses supported every year. So in 2017, we added a chapter specifically focusing on inclusive incubation and services. And what was very interesting is that out of the 120 respondents, 50% of the members claimed to work with underrepresented groups and were giving some insights about these entrepreneurs and the services they received. You can find information on the report I was mentioning in my presentation. A general approach in EBN, as this is not the core yet of our members, I think that to track progress, it's of course important to establish an internal monitoring system. As the person was mentioning, social impact measurement can be very challenging. So probably the best way to suggest to start with, and this is what we did in EBN, was to start tracking some simple KPIs on the profile of the entrepreneurs, and then of course the services they were receiving. These allowing to improve the services, the organization setting, so in terms of staff, in terms of skills, in terms of languages, attitudes within the incubators. My 2 cents.
Thank you, Chiara. Still on this topic, there have been a lot of questions for the speakers, namely for Omar and for Antonio, on how they measure the impact in their fund. And specifically, people want to hear from Antonio's perspective his ideas on the impact management project. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Inês. Impact, the most beautiful and hardest thing in our sector. So a couple of things first. So we as a fund, it's important to share that, or better, we as fund managers, our remuneration, the so-called carried interest, so whatever of the profit of the fund that we as fund managers get, is dependent on achieving impact metrics. Basically, what this means is that if a company in our portfolio is super successful financially, but it is not in terms of impact, we don't get the full amount that we would otherwise be entitled to. So the reason why that is important is because even if we would not be committed or whatsoever, the incentives are there that we equally focus on the impact and on the financial performance of the companies. And that's why we have an investment strategy in which we invest in companies that don't have a trade-off between both. The two are mutually reinforcing. On impact, that means that what we do whenever we invest in a company, we define what are the impact metrics, and usually we focus on one or two, and I can explain why. We define what is the impact goal for that metric. So if the metric is reduction in CO2 emissions or job placements, we say we want to achieve within 4 years, we want to achieve X number of job placements or X tons of CO2 saved. And we agreed that with an advisory board. So the role of our advisory board is to validate the impact metrics for each investment that we make. And then we progress and report on the progress of those impact metrics. And that's what will tell us whether we are achieving or not the impact that we intended to achieve. And that is done at a specific startup level, but also at the whole portfolio level. We use the impact management project because we find it as being a very comprehensive framework to once and for all stop putting, this might be controversial, a monetary amount into impact. We are not impact Puritans. We don't like entering into discussions about my impact is bigger than yours. And we don't think impact is a binary concept through which you have or you don't have impact. What we like, and this is a personal view, so it's not right or wrong, what we like is to think that everything has impact, positive and negative. We like to invest in things that address the root causes of the problems. We might fail and get some things or invest in some things that do not succeed from an impact perspective. What we don't want to do, and we're preparing all of that based on the impact management project, is to always explain what was our rationale in terms of impact, on why we invested and why we didn't. In the case of we didn't, we have it internally, and be very clear on the risks that exist, because not everything is positive impact. Sometimes a venture can have very positive impact on the social side of things, but actually be harmful from the environmental standpoint. So we take all of that into account. And what we like about the impact management project is that it's about management, not only about retroactive measurement. Because we define what that metric is from the get-go, we work very hard with the companies to make sure that those metrics are managed. And because our thesis is based on the impact driving the revenues, that means that it's completely part of the business. And if you take it away from the business, basically you don't have a business. So our experience with the impact management project has been very good. We're about to report on our early investments having the IMP. IMP stands for Impact Management Project. The framework, why we did it, why we didn't, why we did it, and why we think there has impact, and what are the risks and contribution. So it's been very good to use that framework.
Thank you so much, Antonio. So I think people would also like to know what Omar's perspective on this same topic is, and I would go ahead and also ask one of the audience's questions, which is whether you support financially the ventures you invest in.
Sorry,
in
whether
the incubation process. If during the incubation process there is any financial support to the. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let's first talk about the impact. Actually, our process is very, very similar to what Antonio just said. We also have our part of our salaries, not salaries, but part of the package that we receive that is linked to the impact. So we have to measure measure it in a rigorous way. At least we try, because it's a very hard thing to do, as Antonio said, and nobody's agrees on the. I mean, it's hard to have everybody agree on the same indicators. So let's first say a few words about the process. It's quite similar. So first thing is that we only look at entrepreneurs who have impact at their core, which create their structures, their companies for impact. So this is the first thing we should say. And then to be able to monitor this impact in every investment, we will define between 5 and 15 indicators. So it's a bit more than what Antonio just said. I'm going to explain why. And then we try to track these metrics during the duration of the investment, so generally between 5 and 10 years. 10 years being the duration of our support to foundations, for example, or organizations that are not startups and that need a bit more time to be able to create value for the fund. So once we have selected these 5 to 15 indicators, we will discuss them every 3 months at the board level, and this makes it as important as the operational KPIs or the financial KPIs that we discuss during the board meetings. And then we actually track the targets, because we set targets. We have an objective for each of the 5 to 15 indicators, and we try to see if we are 80%, 100%. Of course, these percentages are very can be discussed, because it's not easy to take percentages. For example, if you say you're gonna help 100 people, but you help 50 people that are much more in trouble than, I don't know, if you have helped 70 people. Of course, you can discuss the percentages. So it's one way to put it. It's not perfect, of course, but it's the way we do it. And then once we track the objectives, we also monitor a few negative impact things. So when we say negative impact, it's mostly as a business grows, it has to be very conscious of the responsibility it has on a few things. For example, we have social purpose companies who are in the industrial sector. For example, we have one of the only makers of jeans, of clothes in France, which is called 183. Very cool jeans if you want to take a look at it. So the textile sector can create very negative impact. So that's why we try to measure also a few things that we set aside when we invest in the company at first. Yeah, and so this is it. And concerning the IMP, we've looked into it last year, and we're trying to be compliant with the methodology. So the good thing about the IMP, the Impact Management Project, it's not just a methodology. It's kind of a framework that allows many different methodologies to adopt it and be compliant with it. So I think you could have very different types of ways and philosophies to measure impact, which are compliant with the IMP, which is trying to cover 5 dimensions, which are what is the impact, who is concerned with the impact, how much impact is created, what is the contribution of the company in the impact that has been created, and finally, what are the risks. So we try to implement our methodology in these 5 dimensions to be compliant with the IMP. And this year will be the first year that we'll do a reporting which is compliant with the IMP. So that's for the impact question. And concerning our incubation, a very short answer to that, because I've talked a lot. No, we don't actually invest first. We incubate without taking equity in the companies, and then invest if our investment team is interested.
Thank you so much, Omar, for your answer. I have one final question for both speakers. Since for sake of time, we only have 5 more minutes for Q&A. The questions that will not be addressed through the panel will be later addressed via email, so don't worry about that. And my final question for both speakers is from one of the members of the audience that said that he's raising an impact investment fund and thinking about using debt instead of equity, given that the trend over the past 10 years has been very few exits in the impact sector. And he wanted to hear your thoughts about this theory/reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ines. And to answer that question, and also another question that I think popped in terms of gender balance within our portfolio. Within our portfolio of the accelerator, it is 50-50 male and female representation, actually a bit more female representation. Within our portfolio to date, it's 5, so the sample is still small, but it's more male founders than female founders. And I think that's an area in which it's important to do a lot of work to ensure equal access to funding and opportunities based on merits, but ensuring that merits don't get in, or that gender don't get in the way of merits, gender, and any other types of discrimination or variables. In terms of, also had a question about the fund size, which links to the question about the theory of whether it's debt or equity. So my take on this is that solving for the SDGs is probably the most exciting but the most difficult task of our times. And there will not be one strategy, one fund, one instrument, one size fits all. Like, we just need to try a lot. And hopefully there will be thousands of funds out there, thousands of accelerators, millions of social enterprises, everyone doing their job. So basically, what I mean by this is there is no minimum fund size to pay for the costs, because even if there's a small fund size, it might be the fund size that it's important to build a track record, that it's important to support those ideas that are so early that a bigger fund wouldn't support. And maybe the way to pay for the costs is through management fees, but through grant support from a group of foundations that believe in the impact mission of what you're trying to do. Or we are super lucky to have a lot of European Union funding instruments, for instance, the transaction costs instrument, to support funds that don't have all the management fees to do the work that is needed at an early stage. So it depends. And the strategy on debt and equity also depends, because there are no good, or there are no strategies better than others. They're just strategies that aim at achieving different things. Equity can take a lot of forms. You can take on late stage equity, which supposedly has a little bit less risk than what we do, which is we take the most distressed equity, risky approach, because it's so early stage. Debt has a different risk profile, but will also have a different return profile. There haven't been many exits in the impact space. I don't know, if we look at the fast-moving consumer goods industry, for instance, and I think that corroborates the thesis that consumers want to buy products that have the right standards in terms of social and environmental impact. We've seen the Unilever, Procter & Gamble, and the likes of these companies buying, several ethical, fair trade consumer products, products that don't use plastic. So there is an M&A trend there that will probably go now downstream into the value chain, and we'll see more exits. So my only suggestion in those cases, and I mean, what do I know? But my only suggestion is, whenever you define a strategy, it's very important to be very clear that by saying yes to something, you're saying no to a lot of other things, and it's fine. You know you have a good strategy when you say no to good opportunities. That means that you've got a pathway to follow, and all strategies have their benefits in terms of impact, and I would say are much needed to complement this very complex puzzle that is addressing social and environmental challenges in a meaningful way.
Thank you so much, Antonio. I will now give the floor to Alessia, who will wrap up with some conclusions from today.
Yeah, I think we're having some audio issues.
Alessia, you're on mute.
Ah, that's great. Hello.
Okay,
I just
now we
wanted
can
to,
hear you.
to say
The
that
most
I'm
common thing
very,
in 2020. It's fine.
Voila, so it's great actually, because we received lots of cool questions. So thank you, Nesh, for moderating this final part. Thank you, Antonio, Omar, and Chiara, for answering so well all the inquiries that we have received. As Ines mentioned earlier, all the questions that we were not able to address during these moments, we will try to answer them via email. We have the questions registered and also your email addresses. Just maybe a comment on the impact management project for you to know. EVPA is doing a sort of exercise to combine the 5 dimensions of the impact management projects with our own framework, which is a 5-step approach framework. And this is something that we already did in the past together with Social Value International. So our idea as network is really to collaborate with other networks that are doing the that are dealing with the same topic in order to help the sector grow. So stay tuned. And then, of course, you can contact us in order to receive more information. Once more, we're very happy to have this new partnership with Evpn. You will receive more information on the future activities we will run together. So again, stay tuned. Once more, thanks to Maze for this incredible work that we have done together throughout last year and the beginning of this year on this report. It was for us the first time to tackle such a topic on incubators and accelerators, and we see a great value in really putting together the community of investors and the community of impact incubators and accelerators, but also to involve all those incubators and accelerators that are not primarily focused on impact. So again, for strengthening the ecosystem and strengthening the collaboration among actors there. Just a brief mention to a survey, short survey that you will receive after this webinar, since it's very important for us to understand the impact that we are having through our activities. It would be great if you can take these 2 additional minutes to fill in it. And of course, if you didn't do it yet, on our website you can download the report. You will find all the interesting findings that we were discussing today. A big thank to our colleague Caroline Cornil for having taken care of the designing part. You will see the report, it's really cool. And again, we are here available for you to answer all the questions you might have. So thank you so much for being with us today and for the great interest you show in this topic. Thank you once more, Gianluca, Ines, for running this webinar together with me. And again, Chiara, Omar, and Antonio. It was really nice to have you on board today with us. So stay tuned and have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.